Imagine thinking you know your partner inside and out, until one day a subtle change in their behavior shatters everything you believed about your life together. I started to notice the smell of unfamiliar perfume on her scarf, strange charges on our credit card, and the wary look in her eyes when she received text messages. I brushed it off as a coincidence, until the signs turned into irrefutable evidence of a hidden life, a life that included more than just infidelity. But then the real mystery begins, a shocking message I received on an encrypted device, the final test that promises to lead us further down a rabbit hole of betrayal and danger. The question still hangs in the air, what happens next? How deep does the mystery go, and can our broken trust be restored? Let's find out together. I never imagined that the quiet murmurs of doubt would eventually lead me down a maze of secrets and shattered illusions. Our marriage had always been my sanctuary, a steady rhythm of everyday routines, shared smiles over morning coffee, and long, comforting embraces after a taxing day. My wife, Elena, had always been the epitome of grace and consistency, a beacon of warmth in the sometimes chaotic world outside our door. Yet, as the seasons shifted, so too did the subtle cadence of our lives. At first, it was barely noticeable. A slight change in her routine, an extra moment of hesitation before answering my questions about her day. I brushed it off as the natural ebb and flow of a person's mood, a response to stress at work or perhaps the tired remnants of a restless night. But the discrepancies began to mount. Elena started arriving home later than usual, citing meetings that I later discovered had been nothing more than vague promises of a few extra minutes spent on the phone. The once shared laughter and whispered confidences during our quiet dinners were now replaced by distant silences, punctuated by her distracted glances at her phone. I remember one particular evening vividly. The clock on the wall ticked past 8 p.m., a time we had always reserved for unwinding together. Instead, I found her curled up in the study, her eyes fixated on the glowing screen of her laptop. When I asked if everything was all right, she hesitated, just for a moment, and then offered a weak smile. "Just some work stuff," she murmured, too quickly, as if she were chasing away a troubling thought. I wanted to press further, to peel back the layers of that half-truth, but something in her tone, a vulnerability mingled with a desperate need for privacy, stopped me. I decided to trust her, to trust the sanctity of our bond, despite the tiny fissures forming at its edges. It wasn't just the late nights or the secretive phone calls. There were subtler signs too. A perfume scent I'd never noticed before lingering on her scarf, an unexplained credit card charge for a restaurant she had always claimed not to like, and a sudden interest in activities that didn't include me. I began to notice the way her eyes lit up when she received a message, the way she hesitated before letting her hand drop as if she were holding on to something precious and forbidden. Every small detail, each tiny behavioral shift, felt like a crack in the glass facade of our life together. Yet, even as the storm of suspicion gathered in my mind, I chose to ignore it. I convinced myself that I was simply overthinking, a product of an overactive imagination spurred by the mundane routines of everyday life. I clung to the hope that our love was strong enough to weather any misunderstanding, that my doubts were merely shadows in a room too bright with trust and familiarity. I told myself that if there were truly something amiss, I would eventually notice something undeniable. And so, I let the ambiguity linger, rationalizing that sometimes, the heart sees what it wants to see. But as the weeks turned into months, the whispers of uncertainty grew louder. I found myself retracing every conversation, every fleeting glance, trying desperately to reconcile the image of the woman I knew with the one whose actions now seemed veiled in mystery. Late at night, when the world was silent and the only sound was the steady tick of the clock, I lay awake pondering whether I was missing a hidden truth, a truth that could change everything. In retrospect, I realized that my inaction was a choice. A choice to trust blindly in the surface of things, to ignore the subtle signals that life sometimes sends when it's trying to warn you. The irony, of course, is that by ignoring those signs, I was both protecting my peace of mind and simultaneously inviting the unraveling of a delicate tapestry that had once been the center of my existence. That fateful autumn evening, as a chill wind rustled through the half-open window and the first leaves of the season began to fall, I sat alone in our dimly lit living room. I stared at the empty space beside me on the couch and wondered if the distance between us was growing in more ways than one. My mind teetered on the edge of denial and acceptance, caught in a silent battle that I was too afraid to lose. And so, I continued as if nothing were wrong, believing that the truth might reveal itself in time, and that I was simply being cautious rather than complacent. In the weeks following that chilly autumn evening, my inner turmoil deepened. The seeds of doubt that I had so desperately tried to bury began to sprout into full-blown paranoia. It wasn't long before everyday moments started to twist into ominous portents of betrayal. I found myself obsessing over every minute detail of our shared life, each mundane conversation, each trivial routine, searching for hidden meanings that might betray a secret. One rainy Tuesday evening, while Elena was out on one of her so-called work meetings, I decided to wander through our quiet home in a desperate attempt to clear my mind. The gentle pitter-patter of rain on the windows became a metronome for my anxious thoughts. I found myself in our study, where the remnants of her hurried work were scattered across the desk, an open notebook filled with cryptic annotations, a half-sipped cup of tea, and her ever-present laptop. I hesitated at the threshold, a silent battle raging inside me between trust and suspicion. The temptation to know more was overwhelming. With trembling fingers, I reached out and tapped at the keyboard. A window popped up, a messaging app filled with a string of conversations that I'd never seen before. The screen glowed with names and numbers, each message a potential clue. I scrolled slowly, my heart pounding louder with every line. There were messages that were cryptic, flirtatious, even playful. Each word, every emoticon, struck me like shards of glass in the silence of the study. I felt both violated and irresistibly drawn to the truth. Yet, even as I read, a part of me desperately clung to the belief that perhaps there was an innocent explanation, a simple case of professional camaraderie or misinterpreted banter. I closed the laptop with shaky hands, a storm of emotions churning within me. Had I gone too far? The guilt of invading her privacy warred with an insatiable need for clarity. That night, sleep eluded me as I lay awake in our dim bedroom, replaying every conversation and every unexplained gesture. My mind became a battleground for conflicting narratives, one where I was a devoted husband betrayed by deception, and another where my imagination had painted enemies out of benign shadows. I questioned every memory of our happier times. Was I now merely a fool, blind to the complexities of modern love and loyalty? As days turned into a blur of anxious surveillance, I noticed even subtler changes in Elena. She began to leave the house with an air of urgency, her departure marked by the soft click of a door that seemed more final than ever before. Her phone, once an accessory of her professional life, now seemed to hold a life of its own. I caught fleeting glimpses of texts while she was engrossed in a conversation with a neighbor, messages that faded as quickly as they appeared. My heart ached with the realization that I was slowly becoming a stranger in the home I had built with her, a silent observer of her increasingly mysterious routine. Yet, the more I searched for concrete evidence, the more elusive it became. I started piecing together a timeline, late returns, secretive phone calls, hurried excuses. The narrative began to resemble a puzzle with too many missing pieces. In the midst of my investigation, I encountered another unexpected twist. One evening, while sifting through a stack of discarded receipts and bills in our closet, a task I undertook under the guise of organizing our shared finances, I discovered an envelope addressed to Elena, filled with photographs. The images were innocuous at first glance, a smiling woman at a cafe, candid snapshots in a park, intimate dinners under city lights. Yet, the undeniable intimacy captured in those moments spoke volumes. The woman in the photographs was not someone I recognized. The realization that Elena had been nurturing a parallel life, documented meticulously in silent frames, sent a chill down my spine. Conflicted and devastated, I wrestled with the impulse to confront her immediately. Part of me craved a dramatic showdown, a cathartic release that would lay bare all hidden truths. But another, more cautious part urged me to hold back, to gather more evidence before shattering the fragile remnants of our shared history. I was caught in a relentless loop of what-ifs and if-onlys, tormented by the nagging fear that any misstep could either confirm my worst suspicions or obliterate them entirely, leaving me in a perpetual state of regret. The days turned darker as I became increasingly isolated within my own home, a silent guardian of secrets that threatened to dismantle the very foundation of my life. Every tick of the clock in the silent corridors of our once happy home echoed the profound loneliness I felt, a loneliness not born from solitude, but from the deep realization that I was living a life filled with echoes of the woman I once knew. With every hidden text and secret photograph, I was forced to confront a bitter truth. In ignoring the early signs of change, I had unwittingly become complicit in the slow disintegration of our marriage. Was it my stubborn loyalty to the idea of what we once were, or was it fear, the fear of facing a truth too painful to digest? As I sat there, the envelope still clutched in my hands, I couldn't help but wonder if I had already sealed our fate by choosing inaction over confrontation. The images, the messages, the unanswered questions, they all converged into a labyrinth of uncertainty, leaving me stranded in a place where trust and betrayal danced in a cruel, unending waltz. In the weeks after my discovery of that mysterious envelope, the fabric of my daily existence unraveled with a disquieting slowness. I tried to maintain the illusion of normalcy, sitting across the breakfast table from Elena, exchanging perfunctory pleasantries, and nodding at her half-hearted explanations of work meetings and urgent errands. Yet inside, I was a maelstrom of questions and anguish. Every gesture she made, every lingering glance at her phone, reverberated through me like a siren of betrayal. Unable to quell my growing unease, I began to take measures I never thought I'd consider. Late one evening, while Elena slept soundly beside me, I sat at my desk and reached out to an old acquaintance, a private investigator with a reputation for untangling webs of deceit. I hesitated, hand hovering over the phone, as if dialing that number would make the truth inevitable. But the seed of suspicion had germinated too deeply within me, and soon I was relaying every detail, every subtle change I had witnessed, to someone who promised discretion and thoroughness. Over the next few days, I found myself caught in an agonizing limbo. The investigator's visits to our home were discreet, his questions meticulously crafted to avoid raising Elena's suspicions. I felt like I was living in a double life, one part of me clinging desperately to the memories of a once happy marriage, while another part plunged into a dark investigation fueled by a gnawing need for certainty. The silent hum of the air conditioner and the ticking of the clock in our dimly lit living room became the only constants as I waited for the investigator to report back. Then, one evening, as the sky melted into a bruised purple twilight, the call came, a soft, measured tone that sent a shudder down my spine. The investigator's voice, careful yet laced with an uncharacteristic gravity, confirmed my deepest fears. Elena had indeed been engaging in clandestine meetings. The description was vague, the details murky enough to leave room for ambiguity, but undeniable in its implication. My hands trembled as I listened, each word a hammer blow to the fragile remnants of trust that I had once taken for granted. But what unsettled me most was not the confirmation of infidelity itself, it was the revelation of a pattern that I hadn't seen before. Elena's secretive behavior extended beyond furtive meetings and hushed phone calls. The investigator mentioned that she had been in contact with someone who was not just an ordinary acquaintance, but a man of influence in a world that I knew nothing about, a world of business intrigues, social power plays, and mysterious alliances. This man, whose name was uttered in hushed tones and accompanied by hints of dangerous liaisons, seemed to be pulling the strings behind Elena's newfound independence. Haunted by this information, I began retracing the events of the past few months with a newfound lens. I recalled the times when Elena's eyes would flicker with a strange intensity during conversations, and when her laughter would ring out with a tinge of guilt or excitement. Every small, seemingly insignificant detail suddenly formed part of a larger, cryptic mosaic that I struggled to decipher. Was she simply seeking an escape from the monotony of our life, or was she entangled in a web of ambitions and secrets that I had never even dreamed of? As days bled into nights, I found solace in solitude and in the confiding of my inner torment to long-forgotten corners of my mind. The investigation's revelations drove me to confront not only the betrayal I felt but also the unsettling possibility that I had been complicit in nurturing a love that was slowly being undermined by silence and inaction. I began to chronicle every encounter, every suspicious smile or furtive glance, as if my notes might someday serve as both a testament to our love and an indictment of my own failings. The act of writing became a lifeline, a way to hold on to the fading memories of what our marriage had once represented, even as reality reconfigured itself into something darker and more complex. In a particularly agonizing moment, I stumbled upon a series of emails on our shared computer, a correspondence between Elena and this enigmatic man. Their words, draped in a veneer of casual conversation, hinted at meetings in undisclosed locations and plans that sounded more like transactions than expressions of affection. The language was careful, almost clinical, devoid of the overt passion one might expect from a clandestine affair. And yet, beneath that cool surface, there lay a current of intensity that I could not ignore. Was she driven by desire, ambition, or a desperate bid for reinvention? The uncertainty was as maddening as it was revealing. One evening, after a long day spent wrestling with these turbulent emotions, I decided to confront the silence head-on. I sat in the living room, the shadows lengthening around me, and waited for Elena to return from one of her mysterious outings. When she finally appeared, her face was illuminated by the fading light, revealing a tired, almost resigned expression that sent a shiver of recognition down my spine. I attempted to speak, to bridge the chasm that had been widening between us, but the words died on my lips. Instead, I watched her carefully, searching for any sign of remorse, any flicker of the woman I once knew. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment, I saw a reflection of my own inner conflict. There was an unspoken acknowledgement, a silent plea for understanding, but also a guardedness that betrayed secrets too heavy to confess. The encounter left us both suspended in a limbo where words were unnecessary, and every heartbeat echoed the uncertainty of a future that neither of us dared to envision fully. Now, standing at this precarious crossroads between love and betrayal, I feel the weight of every decision pressing down on me. My investigation has uncovered truths that have shattered the illusions I clung to, and yet, a part of me remains inexplicably drawn to the possibility that there is more to her story, a narrative woven with layers of regret, ambition, and perhaps even redemption. As I sit here, pen in hand, struggling to reconcile the woman I loved with the stranger whose secrets now consume our shared life, I am left wondering, is the path forward one of confrontation and painful honesty, or will the secrets continue to fester in the silent spaces between us? In the weeks following that uneasy confrontation, the quiet spaces in our home grew heavier, laden with unsaid words and suspended confessions. Elena's return from her outings had become increasingly erratic. There were days when she seemed lost in thought, her eyes distant, as if trying to recall memories that weren't entirely her own. The tension in the house was palpable, woven into every glance and every silence between us. I found myself caught between the desire for an honest dialogue and the overwhelming urge to remain in the shadows, letting the truth simmer until it was undeniable. The investigator's revelations had shifted something within me, a part of me was now compelled to pry further, to search for more concrete answers. I began to document every minor detail of our days, from the extra layers of lipstick on her purse to the hurried phone calls in the middle of the night. It was as if I had become both the detective and the victim in this unfolding drama. Late one evening, as rain drummed steadily against our window panes and the world outside seemed to drown in an inky oblivion, I received a package in the mail. There was no return address, just a plain brown envelope that felt heavy with implication. Inside, I discovered a series of photographs and documents that painted an even more disturbing picture. The photographs were taken at various locales, a secluded hotel room at dawn, a quiet park bench under the pale glow of streetlights, and a busy restaurant where Elena had been seen conversing animatedly with the enigmatic man. But what caught my attention were the documents, blurred excerpts of contracts, pages of handwritten notes, and, most shockingly, a confidential letter with a stamp from an unfamiliar government agency. The letter, partially obscured by water damage and age, mentioned a project that Elena had been involved in, a project that was cloaked in layers of secrecy and urgency. There were hints of financial transactions and undisclosed meetings that suggested her involvement went far beyond a simple extramarital liaison. It dawned on me that Elena might have been entangled in something far more complex, a web of corporate espionage, political maneuvering, or perhaps a desperate bid to escape a shadowy past. The ambiguity was maddening, every line in the letter begged for context, and every signature in the documents hinted at alliances that I could scarcely imagine. The more I pored over these revelations, the more I questioned the reliability of everything I thought I knew. Was my pain the result of a single betrayal, or was I now caught in a far broader conspiracy that involved more than just our marriage? The realization that Elena might have been leading a double life, one that involved not only passion and betrayal but also intrigue and risk, left me reeling. I began to suspect that her emotional distance and sudden preoccupation with secrecy were not just symptoms of infidelity, but perhaps markers of a dangerous game in which she was unwillingly entangled. Determined to confront the ambiguity head-on, I decided that I could no longer remain a passive observer. One humid evening, as the city's neon lights flickered against the dark sky, I sat her down in the quiet solitude of our study. The air between us was thick with tension. I laid out the photographs, the documents, and the water-damaged letter before her, my voice steady despite the tempest raging within me. "Elena," I began, my tone measured, "I've come across things, evidence that suggests your life isn't as simple as I believed. I'm not here to judge, but I need to understand. Who is the man you've been meeting? And what is this project that seems to have consumed you?" Her eyes, usually so full of guarded warmth, widened in a mix of shock and resignation. For a long, excruciating moment, she said nothing, her gaze drifting to the scattered papers as if they were pieces of a puzzle she could no longer hide from. Finally, with trembling hands, she reached out to take one of the photographs. "You don't understand," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "It's not about us anymore. It's about something that I got caught up in, something that I never wanted to be a part of." Her admission sent a chill through me. In that instant, I realized that the betrayal I had feared might be only one facet of a far larger, more convoluted reality. Elena's tone was laced with a profound sorrow, a sorrow that hinted at choices made under duress, at secrets that had grown too dangerous to keep hidden. She began to recount a story of an unexpected job offer, a seemingly innocent proposal from a reputable firm that soon spiraled into a labyrinth of covert operations and high-stakes decisions. According to her, what had started as a promising new beginning quickly turned into a series of morally ambiguous choices that left her trapped in a cycle of lies and half-truths. As she spoke, the woman I thought I knew transformed before my eyes. The infidelity I had suspected was only the surface of a deeper wound, one that had festered long before our marriage had begun to unravel. Elena's confession revealed that she had been approached by powerful figures who promised her a way out of a financially desperate situation, a way to reinvent herself and secure a future she never thought possible. But the cost was steep, her complete involvement in clandestine activities that compromised not only her integrity but the safety of those around her. The conversation left me in a state of profound disorientation. I oscillated between feelings of betrayal and empathy, torn by the realization that the person I loved was not entirely at fault, yet undeniably ensnared in forces beyond her control. The documents and photographs were undeniable proof of her secret life, yet her eyes pleaded for understanding, a silent appeal that made me question if I was the true victim of circumstance. Our subsequent days were marked by a tentative truce. Elena became more reserved, her usual warmth replaced by a distant melancholy. I, too, retreated into introspection, my mind swirling with questions. Was I too late to salvage our relationship? Could the love we once shared survive the revelation of such dark, complicated truths? And, most hauntingly, what would become of us if the dangerous world she had stepped into began to encroach upon our lives? The weight of her secret, once hidden in the shadows, now hung heavily in the open. It was as though every corner of our home whispered fragments of a story I could barely piece together, a story of ambition, betrayal, and moral ambiguity. As I sat by the window one rainy night, watching the droplets trace erratic paths down the glass, I wondered if our lives could ever return to the simplicity of what once was, or if we were destined to be forever entangled in the consequences of choices made in desperation. In the aftermath of Elena's confession, our home transformed into a battlefield of unspoken words and simmering emotions. The weight of her secret hung like a shroud over every room, and the once familiar walls now echoed with the murmurs of a past that I desperately wished to reclaim. Despite our tentative truce, the fissures between us deepened. I found myself oscillating between a desire for confrontation and a deep, unsettling empathy for the woman who had been pulled into a vortex of circumstances far beyond her control. One particularly restless night, as a bitter wind howled outside and the shadows on the walls danced in an eerie cadence, I stumbled upon a hidden drawer in our bedroom, a drawer that I had never noticed before. Its presence felt like a final, silent message from a part of Elena I had never fully known. Trembling, I opened it to reveal a collection of letters and a small, intricately carved wooden box. The letters, written in an elegant yet hurried script, chronicled a series of clandestine meetings and coded exchanges. They spoke of threats, promises of protection, and hints of a secret organization with stakes that extended far beyond our domestic sphere. As I leafed through the correspondence, my mind raced to connect the dots. One letter in particular, marked with a red wax seal and addressed simply to E, mentioned a meeting scheduled at a deserted marina under the cloak of darkness. The tone was urgent, almost desperate, warning of imminent danger if the rendezvous were not honored. My heart pounded with a mix of dread and an inexplicable sense of duty. Was this the final piece of the puzzle, a call to action that would force both of us into a confrontation with the unseen forces manipulating our lives? That night, unable to sleep and driven by a compulsion to uncover the whole truth, I decided to follow the clues. Under the guise of a routine errand, I left the house with a resolve that was both determined and fragile. The marina was a forgotten corner of the city, its rusted piers and creaking boats a stark contrast to the polished veneer of our urban life. I arrived with trepidation, the cold air stinging my skin as I searched for any sign of life amid the dilapidated structures. After what felt like an eternity wandering between shadowed corridors of abandoned warehouses, I noticed a solitary figure near a weathered boat. The figure was cloaked in a long coat, obscuring any identifying features, and seemed to be waiting with an air of anticipation. I approached cautiously, the gravel crunching beneath my feet in the silence of the night. As I drew nearer, the figure turned, and in that brief moment, our eyes met. There was no hostility, only a guarded recognition that spoke of secrets too burdensome to be spoken aloud. Without a word, the stranger motioned for me to follow, leading me through a labyrinth of hidden pathways along the docks. My mind was a whirlwind of questions. Who was this person? And how did they know of the meeting detailed in the letter? The answers, however, were slow to come. We arrived at a small, nondescript building with a heavy metal door that bore no markings except for a single symbol, a circle bisected by a line, reminiscent of an ancient emblem. The door creaked open to reveal a room bathed in dim, pulsating light, where several individuals sat around a long, scarred table. Their eyes, each filled with an unspoken understanding, turned to me as I entered. A hushed murmur filled the room as the man who had led me here stepped forward. His voice, steady and authoritative, explained that Elena's involvement was part of a larger, covert network dedicated to exposing corrupt power structures within both corporate and governmental realms. The documents and photographs I had discovered were mere fragments of a more intricate narrative, one where Elena had been recruited for her unique skills and resilience. According to him, her initial foray into this world had been voluntary, driven by a deep-seated need to right the wrongs of her past. However, as the stakes grew higher, the organization's demands became increasingly dangerous, and the risks to her personal life, and ours, grew exponentially. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. The man's words painted a picture of a heroine ensnared in a dangerous game of espionage and moral ambiguity, far removed from the infidelity I had once imagined. Yet, the undeniable fact remained that she had kept this world hidden from me, a secret that had slowly eroded the foundation of our marriage. I questioned whether the passion for justice he spoke of had blinded her to the consequences on our personal lives. The room fell silent as I absorbed his explanation, my mind swirling with both anger and sorrow. Could it be that Elena's betrayal was not born out of malice, but out of a desperate need to protect a greater good, even if it meant sacrificing the intimacy of our shared life? The meeting, however, did not end with a neat resolution. Instead, it revealed a new threat. The man's tone turned grave as he disclosed that a rival faction within the organization was gaining momentum, a group that did not hesitate to use violence and coercion to achieve its ends. He hinted that Elena's involvement might have placed her in the crosshairs of this ruthless faction, and that their next move could have dire repercussions not just for her, but for anyone connected to her past. The implications were staggering: our home, our lives, and perhaps the very fabric of the community could soon be embroiled in a conflict of monumental proportions. As I left the building that night, my mind churned with the enormity of what I had learned. The marina, the hidden meeting, and the cryptic warnings had shattered any remnants of the simple life I once knew. The man's parting words, a solemn reminder that sometimes the pursuit of truth comes with an unpayable price, echoed in my ears as I made my way back through the darkened streets. Returning home felt surreal. Every step was weighted with the knowledge of a secret war waged in the shadows, a war that I was now irrevocably part of. I wondered if I had the strength to confront Elena with these revelations, or if our fractured relationship could survive the collision of personal betrayal and clandestine battles for justice. More than ever, I was forced to confront the painful reality that the love I thought I knew was intertwined with risks and sacrifices that defied any simple explanation. In the days that followed my clandestine visit to the hidden meeting at the marina, I felt as if I were suspended between two worlds, a life that had been ordinary until recently, and one that was now entangled with secrets, conspiracies, and danger. Every morning, the routine of waking up in our shared home was punctured by a nagging sense of urgency. I found myself constantly scanning our surroundings, half expecting to see shadows lengthen in corners or to hear whispers behind closed doors. The steady heartbeat of normalcy had been disrupted, and the tranquility of our marriage was now an echo of something lost. My thoughts turned repeatedly to Elena. How could I reconcile the tender woman who once read poetry to me at dusk with the covert agent whose actions had thrust us into this perilous narrative? The memory of her soft laughter and gentle assurances was now intermingled with the image of secretive meetings and coded exchanges. Each time I tried to envision her explanation, a tale of duty, redemption, and the high stakes of a secret world, I found my heart constricted between empathy and fury. I was torn between wanting to believe in her noble intentions and the raw pain of being left in the dark. Late one evening, as rain hammered against the window and the city's neon glow blurred the lines between reality and illusion, I made the decision to confront the situation head-on. I returned home earlier than usual, my mind racing with plans and questions. The house, usually a haven of calm, now felt charged with the silent pulse of impending confrontation. I sat in the study, the same room that had once been a sanctuary for shared dreams, and began to compose a message I wasn't sure I could ever send. Before I could finalize my thoughts, a soft knock at the door startled me. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Peering through the peephole, I saw a figure cloaked in the darkness, the outline of a familiar yet elusive presence. The figure, illuminated briefly by the hallway light, bore an uncanny resemblance to Elena, but something in their demeanor was different, more resolved, more urgent. I hesitated for a moment, then opened the door to find Elena standing there, eyes glistening with a mixture of resolve and sorrow. "I knew you'd be here," she said in a hushed tone, as though the weight of her secret had compelled her to seek me out at this moment. Her voice, though soft, carried an unmistakable timbre of authority, as if she had come to accept the consequences of her actions. We stood in the entryway, a chasm of unspoken words and painful truths stretching between us. The room around us, usually filled with the simple comforts of our shared life, now seemed to hold the gravity of our past decisions and the uncertain promise of what was to come. Without preamble, Elena led me to the living room and sat me down. The air was thick with tension as she began to speak, her words carefully measured, revealing layers of her secret that I had only glimpsed before. She told me that her involvement in the covert organization had deep roots that stretched back to a time when her life was fraught with hardships and unfulfilled promises. The organization, she explained, had offered her not just a way out, but a chance to reclaim control over her destiny. In the beginning, it had been a rescue from a life of obscurity and despair. Yet, as the operations became more dangerous and the moral lines more blurred, she found herself trapped in a web of obligations and deceptions. Her confession was punctuated by raw emotion. "I never meant to hurt you," she pleaded, tears glistening on her cheeks as she recounted the long nights of secret meetings, the coded messages, and the constant fear of retribution from rival factions. "Every decision I made was a step toward something I believed was bigger than both of us, something that could change everything." As she spoke, I saw not just the betrayal of our marriage, but also the weight of a destiny that had been thrust upon her without any real choice. I was caught between the urge to rescue her from this perilous path and the realization that her choices had already irrevocably altered our lives. But the revelations didn't end there. Elena reached beneath her coat and produced a small, encrypted device, a key to further secrets that the organization had entrusted her with. "This holds the records of our past operations," she said, her voice trembling with both fear and defiance. "I've been planning to dismantle the part of the network that has grown too ruthless, but I need your help. I can't do this alone." Her plea was laden with desperation, as though the future itself balanced precariously on the edge of a knife. The implications were staggering: our lives, our safety, and our love were now intertwined with a dangerous mission that threatened to upend everything. In that moment, I realized that the woman I once knew was both more vulnerable and more courageous than I had ever imagined. The person before me was a mosaic of strength and frailty, a fighter caught in a struggle that defied the simple dichotomy of right and wrong. The decision before me was agonizing: should I stand by her, risking everything to confront the enemy within her secret world, or retreat into the semblance of our former life, leaving the dangerous machinations to unravel on their own? As the hours slipped by in the dim glow of the living room, we pored over the encrypted data, discussing possible courses of action, and weighing the risks against the promise of redemption. The conversation was punctuated by long pauses, each filled with the echo of our shared history and the uncertain beat of our future. Outside, the storm raged on, a fitting mirror to the turmoil within our hearts. The gravity of our choices pressed down upon us like a storm cloud, and as the night deepened, I found myself teetering on the brink of a decision that could either save our relationship or shatter it beyond repair. The weight of secrets, lies, and clandestine operations had woven a tapestry that was both intricate and perilous, and the path ahead was shrouded in uncertainty. In the days following that tumultuous night, the air in our home was heavy with anticipation and the unspoken promise of change. Elena and I had reached a crossroads, a point where our personal struggles and the dangerous undercurrents of the covert organization merged. The encrypted device sat on the coffee table, its silent glow a constant reminder of the mission that now lay before us. With each tick of the clock, the stakes grew higher, and the possibility of irreversible change loomed like an approaching storm. We spent long hours poring over the data it held, deciphering cryptic logs and intercepted communications that painted a picture of internal strife within the organization. Elena's voice, once soft and apologetic, now resonated with determination as she explained that there was a faction within the network planning a drastic power grab, a move that threatened not only the fragile balance of their clandestine world but also the lives of those caught in its crossfire. Her eyes, reflecting both fear and resolve, met mine as she confided her plan to dismantle this faction from within. "I need you with me," she insisted, her tone a blend of vulnerability and steely conviction. "Together, we can expose them, stop the chaos before it engulfs everything we hold dear." Torn between the desire to reclaim the familiar comfort of our former life and the magnetic pull of a mission that promised redemption, I found myself grappling with a decision that could redefine not only our relationship but our very identities. Each step toward the organization's shadowy nucleus felt like an act of both defiance and hope, a declaration that love, even when tested by betrayal and dangerous secrets, might still be capable of fostering change. Under cover of a moonless night, Elena and I set out. Our journey took us through the labyrinthine backstreets of a city that seemed to be watching our every move, its alleys whispering of danger and hidden alliances. Every corner revealed a potential threat, a black sedan idling in the distance, the furtive glances of passers-by, the sudden silence that fell over busy intersections. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being led into a trap, yet the desire to follow through with Elena's plan outweighed the mounting terror in my gut. We arrived at an abandoned industrial complex, a relic of a bygone era now repurposed as a clandestine meeting spot for those at the heart of the organization. The building's exterior was scarred by time and neglect, its walls bearing the marks of secrets that had long since been buried. Inside, the dim corridors were punctuated by the faint hum of old machinery and the soft murmurs of voices discussing matters too delicate for the light of day. Elena's hand tightened around mine as we navigated the maze-like interior, each step resonating with the weight of our choices. In a secure chamber guarded by individuals whose loyalty was as uncertain as the shifting alliances outside, we were ushered into a covert briefing. A figure, his face obscured by shadows and the reflective surface of a polished table, outlined the latest intelligence. The rogue faction was preparing for a move that could destabilize not just the organization but also the political and corporate systems that had long operated in tandem with it. The plan was audacious and fraught with peril, an all-out internal coup that would leave countless lives shattered in its wake. As the briefing concluded, I found myself alone with Elena in a quiet corner of the facility. The fluorescent lights above cast harsh shadows on her face, highlighting the conflict that lay behind her determined eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered, the confession layered with regret and resolute purpose. "But I couldn't stand by while so many innocents suffered under the weight of these lies. Every secret I kept, every moment of silence, it was all a desperate attempt to keep the monster at bay." Her words, though meant to explain, only deepened the chasm between the comfort of our shared past and the uncertainty of our future. In that moment, I realized that our lives had been irrevocably altered by the decisions made in silence and the secrets that had festered over time. The betrayal was no longer confined to infidelity in the conventional sense, it had morphed into a complex web of moral dilemmas, covert operations, and unforeseen sacrifices. I looked at Elena, searching for remnants of the woman who had once been my entire world, and saw instead someone driven by an unyielding commitment to a cause much larger than either of us. We spent the following hours strategizing, our whispered plans intermingling with the distant echoes of conflict. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to light the sky, a reminder that time was both our enemy and our ally. As we prepared to take the next step in our dangerous mission, a sense of fragile hope stirred within me. We might be standing on the brink of an irreversible chasm, but perhaps, in exposing the rotten core of the organization, we could reclaim not only our love but also our integrity. Then, as if the universe itself sought to deepen the mystery, a sudden message buzzed on the encrypted device. The screen flickered to life with a coded alert that read, "Operation Horizon, initiate at 0600 hours. Do you have what it takes?" The message was unsigned, its brevity both challenging and tantalizing. In that charged moment, I looked to Elena, her expression a mixture of determination and uncertainty, and wondered if we were ready to step fully into the unknown. The night's events, the confessions, the danger, and the unresolved questions about the true nature of the organization all converged into a singular point of decision. The future lay before us, open-ended and fraught with peril, beckoning us to either retreat into the safety of familiar illusions or plunge headfirst into the chaos in pursuit of a truth that might set us free, or destroy us entirely. As the new day approached, we stood together at the precipice of destiny, our fates intertwined with secrets too deep to fully comprehend. With one final, uncertain look at the rising sun, we knew that our next step would define not just our future, but the very meaning of trust and redemption in a world where nothing was ever as it seemed. What will we choose? Will our love be the spark that ignites change, or will the shadows of betrayal and danger swallow us whole? The answer remains suspended in that fragile moment, leaving our story poised on the edge of an uncertain dawn.